Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special Jacobin talk. My name is Kale, and I'm the video editor here at Jacobin. And today we're celebrating 10 years of the magazine, the print magazine. The YouTube has only been here for a couple months. Hope that we make it 10 years, but the magazine has been with us for 10 years since 2010. And so we're going to actually be talking about that all night. A little self-congratulatory, but I think it's warranted. And so we're joined by our editor and publisher, Bhaskar Sankara. He's been with us the entire time. I'm saying we now is because I'm part of the magazine too. But Bhaskar's been the force behind Jacobin. I would say one of the most important forces behind the revival of a genuine American left intellectual culture. And so very happy that we can actually talk about this and actually genuinely congratulate Bhaskar on a really important achievement historically and in the moment, of course. And to do that stroking, we have Jonah Birch, who is a professor of sociology. He's also a contributing editor at Jacobin. I've only known Jonah, well, I've known both of you only a couple of years, but both two of the nicest and smartest people on the left, so couldn't have had a better pairing to do this. I do want to say before we get going that tomorrow on Saturday at 1 p.m. we have another episode of Weekends with Anna Kasparian and Nando Vila, and they're joined by a professor of law and history at Yale University, Samuel Moyn, to talk about the politics around the Supreme Court. That's going to be good as always. But right now, I guess we're just going to jump right into it. Two more things is that please hit like, please hit subscribe, please share this with your friends. But more importantly, we're asking for donations tonight. And I'm sure Bhaskar can give a better pitch than I can right now. But because of the moment that we're in, because of that's 10 years that we are, in fact, doing a bit of a fundraising drive. So any Super Chat questions we will address tonight, please submit Super Chats through the YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate it.
This time you could actually use profanity in the Super Chats. You could ask really terrible things, and as long as there's money attached to it, we'll take it and we'll put it to the cause. And for those of you on YouTube, on Facebook, you could just go to jacobinmag.com/donate. We're doing a donation drive this month to celebrate our 10th anniversary, and also to make up for the fact that nobody's buying Jacobin on newsstands this year for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I guess with that, I'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you, Kale, for the rousing introduction. I'm happy to be here and to do lots of the stroking, as we said. The 10th anniversary extravaganza is definitely, it's something to celebrate and something to remember. And I remember when Jacobin first appeared on the scene before I had ever met Bhaskar, it was such a breath of fresh air. It was clear from the beginning to me what an important role it was going to play politically for the American left. Obviously from the beginning, people talked about how readable it was and, how well put together, and obviously Bhaskar had a lot of help from people almost, I think from the beginning, from people like Ramike Forbes, who worked on the design aspect of it. But it's great to be here 10 years later and see what an impact it's had and what an important role it's still playing. Yep, here's an article by Ramike. People know, he's an important figure behind Jacobin. Not someone who appears in front of the camera so often, but definitely an important figure. And I guess just to talk about the history a little bit, and I do think, Bhaskar, that we should give people a little bit of a sense of what the American left used to be like before Jacobin. It's changed for a number of reasons, which obviously go well beyond Jacobin. But and a little bit of the sense of the context in which Jacobin was founded. Can you talk a little bit about the circumstances? I mean, I think it was right before Occupy, right? And in the middle of Obama's first term.
Yeah. So Jacobin, well, first of all, I was the editor of The Activist, that young democratic socialist blog that David Dualde, who you might know from the internet as a democratic socialist on the internet now, was at the time the youth director of DSA. He had me work on this blog, so I started soliciting contributions from people like Chris Maisano, Peter Fraze, and other early Jacobin contributors. Adrian Blyfus-Prados was maybe one of the major people as part of that blog, that we never have convinced him in 10 years to write for Jacobin. But it is a hard sell. So he's a lawyer, but a good lawyer. He does like immigration and civil rights law. So he has
not one of those sharks, but one of the good ones. Good.
Exactly. So basically, I was a socialist from very early on in my teens. I had some experience editing and building this network of people. And to be a democratic socialist, we were like the pariahs of the left, or we were just kind of like, we didn't have a home. Like a lot of DSA chapters at the time, YDS chapters, Young Democratic Socialist chapters, were like renaming themselves things like Democratic Left. Actually, our little group, most of my activism was through the Progressive Student Union at GW, but our little socialist group at GW was called the Democratic Left at GW, which is just the most pathetic 80s, 90s kind of defeat name. And even when we were doing good work, it was just through these broader fronts. Like Students Against Sweatshops was really important. United Students Against Sweatshops. There was still like some rumblings of the anti-war movement that was kind of in decay. The left, a lot of it was like John Holloway kind of changed the world without taking power. In the first issue of Jacobin, I criticized the excessive focus on the Zapatistas in the U.S. left. Obviously, I support the Zapatista struggle, but it was a real fetish and a real excessive point of emphasis from the left. And no one really wanted to talk about the old things like parties and organizations. It was just finding little cracks of resentment, of resistance within things. And yeah, that was so I designed that. So that's my HTML. It's kind of ugly. I mean, it's very ugly, but it was a different time. It's funny because it's a site from 2010, but it looks like a site from like 1996. Yeah. But what can you do? This is before Ramike came around and fixed everything. But you were active yourself on the left. I don't want to date you. You're a few years older than me, but you were active on the left from a pretty young age too. Politicized right after 9/11. Mm-hmm. And what was your impression of the left from 2002 to 2010 in broad strokes? Obviously, we're doing caricatures, but.
Yeah, I mean, I became an active socialist right after 9/11 when I think you were in elementary school still. You were a baby at that point. Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I was in middle school, man. I was in middle school in 9/11. I was in 7th grade.
Well, you retained your youthful disposition. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that my memory of the period before, from during the Bush years and the beginning of the Obama years, was that being a socialist was something of an exercise in like voluntary self-delusion, in the sense that you had these big ideas about what was wrong with society and what needed to change. And then, if you ever paid attention to the actual forces that you could mobilize on the socialist left, I mean, the reality is whatever the kind of dues paying membership of different groups was, I would say at the time Obama was elected, the active kind of organized people you could get out to, on the streets, socialist left, was no more than a few thousand people, 4,000 maybe, in a country of 320 million. I mean, and you felt that. And during the Bush years, after 9/11, things were very difficult, particularly if you wanted to oppose kind of the buildup of the war on terror, the war in Afghanistan. It was very hard. And then suddenly, in the lead up to the Iraq War, the big movements reemerged, kind of even beyond what people had seen in the late 90s, particularly the protests around the Iraq War. But the kind of the hegemonic politics was so firmly within, at the end of the day, the kind of mainstream liberal consensus of that era, which in retrospect looks quite conservative. And there were a series of important social movements after that. I mean, there were major immigrant rights protests in 2006, but they all kind of exploded and then died, it felt like, very quickly, without leaving much of a kind of institutional residue for the left. And meanwhile, the forces of the socialist movement stayed quite small, despite all the terrible things that were happening in society. And in my memory, it does feel like this kind of breakthrough that started. You could see the nucleus of it already a little bit during the Occupy movement, and that was almost at the exact same time that Jacobin was founded, and I first noticed it. And then obviously, in the last couple of years, particularly since 2016, the left has grown quite rapidly. But you saw that a little bit back a decade ago. I mean, is that your impression as well? And does that jive with what you remember? And did you feel
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was very unusual to be a socialist in this period. It was a period of such deep defeat. But I also feel like maybe this is me being excessively nostalgic, but because the socialist movement was so weak, besides for the extreme groups like the Sparts or whatever, I feel like it was an era of good feeling among socialists. Like you'd be in a seat. Sorry, this is just my warped. I was young. People were nice to me back then. Yeah. But in my mind,
before Twitter, yeah.
No, you would see a socialist from like a very different tradition or a different tradition, and one of my first big protests that I went to in New York City was with David Dualde and Maria Svart from DSA and others, and we were marching with like David McReynolds, the late Socialist Party leader, and other SP members, and even some people from the SWP and whatever against austerity in New York. And I guess in a way, like DSA was just one pole among many, and it wasn't that much. It was so small that it almost seemed like the next big wave for the left to get bigger. And something I advocated in the early years of Jacobin was merging together like CCDS, the small Communist Party offshoot, the Communist Party, and maybe like Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the soft Freedom Road Socialist Organization, into DSA. So now I'm just listing groups, which is
that was a lot watching this stream know who those groups, the acronyms that you're.
I know.
But anyway, yeah.
Because I was gonna say free so hard and free so soft, and I'm like nobody knows those terms anymore. Really, but yeah, it was definitely a different period. But before Occupy, I think Wisconsin was a really important galvanizing thing, and Wisconsin in many ways fit within the politics of Jacobin a little bit easier. So right away when Wisconsin happens, our coverage is like, we told you so. This is an anti-austerity movement. It's being driven by unions. It's showing the particular power of public sector workers. So unlike maybe very orthodox Marxists of the past, who did not, focus more on withholding, more on the particular role that private sector workers could have, especially in strategic sectors. We thought that nurses and teachers and other people, had that role, and obviously Wisconsin vindicated that. But with Occupy, I think a lot of us had similar thoughts to Doug Henwood, who wrote a piece at the time where it was like, I went by Occupy and it was a little weird, best of luck to the kids, but I don't think it'll accomplish anything. And, obviously in hindsight, that statement looks wrong. I mean, I felt it at the time. I just didn't dare write it. And I think Occupy really came out of a creative wellspring from, a lot of anarchist groups, I think played a major role in that. And the UC student protests of the time, which it's not that we didn't support, but I don't think we thought much of, like negatively or positively, right? It was like, oh, good anti-austerity thing going on there with kind of weird protest techniques. But I think that spirit like animated Occupy more than our politics, at least the initial spark of it. Do you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I do. And I remember you're talking about the occupation of the Wisconsin state capitol in Madison by unions in protesting against, anti-union legislation being pushed by Scott Walker. And this was in 2011. It was also at the same time as the kind of Arab Spring was taking off.
That was like the second issue of Jacobin covered like that a little bit, the Wisconsin uprising. And also there was a anti-cuts movement was gaining steam in the UK, even though that quickly dissipated, but it was there too.
Yeah, and there have been big student protests, I believe, in the UK, and in France as well. Also, there was a major movement against pension cuts. But I do feel like Occupy became kind of this focal point. As I understand it, there was a Jacobin panel at the time that caught the attention of Glenn Beck. Cale, can we have a clip of Glenn Beck talking about Jacobin? Really his heyday, too. I feel like...
Tonight on the show, new evidence that came up last night of a new conference from a leftist radical that admitted, the only guy who gets it is Glenn Beck because he sees the potential of violence.
Amazing.
Wait, did you have any of Beck talking about like clips from the actual panel via the Beck show? It doesn't matter if you don't, Cale, but
I couldn't find the actual show itself.
Look, I deleted this. I think Jacobin was so broke in 2013 that it made sense to lose a video that had 100,000 views rather than pay for Vimeo Plus. That's how broke we were just a few years ago. So maybe that's lost forever. I hope I could find it on an old hard drive or something. But I think Occupy had these roots in a certain segment of the far left. But the reason why it got such popular resonance, the 99%, 1% rhetoric, and why it had so much widespread support was because people interpreted it as a broad anti-inequality movement, broad anti-austerity movement. It had this popular resonance that I think later fed into what became the mass movement around Bernie Sanders, right? So, but I do think that it's worth saying that, socialists didn't necessarily seed the Occupy moment, but we reacted to it. But as soon as I think politics became bigger in scale, that's when the socialist message was better able to resonate with people. And the way that I often describe it is that there's a critique of capitalism that a lot of parts of the left, they do very well, not just the socialist movement. And there's also a vision of a world beyond capitalism that I find compelling to some degree, reading anarchists and other traditions. I guess maybe you don't, but I find even a lot of this anti-work stuff in the anarchist tradition or whatnot very compelling.
Sure.
But what socialists do really well is historically has been to present a bridge from here to there. We have to organize around these immediate reforms. We have to organize unions. We have to maybe organize a party or some sort of democratic organization. We have to definitely be in the streets, but we have to know how to tactically maneuver and not just kind of tail spontaneous movements. That kind of stuff, I think, played a role in Jacobin's message being easier to penetrate into mainstream liberalism and into people who weren't very politicized, but then got politicized by Occupy, as opposed to some of the existing, rest of the stuff. So that's Ramike's first cover from issue 5 of Jacobin, the first cover he worked on, which is just pretty damn incredible.
Yeah.
Probably the most activist cover we've run.
Yeah, and I wonder, Bhaskar, if in the U.S. left, particularly the far left, there had been such a break historically. I mean, first during McCarthyism, right? And people talk about the old left and the new left. So during the post-war period, a real break from kind of the earlier experiences. But then again, in the 80s and into the 90s, it was such a terrible period for the left politically. And you kind of ended up in, at the time that Jacobin was founded. I mean, my experience was there were some people who were kind of middle-aged or just a little bit older who had a wealth of experience from the New Left maybe, but had kind of been sticking it out for a while and hunkered down a little bit. And then you would get new young people coming into the movement who were moving to the left for all sorts of really good and appreciable reasons. There was a real gap in the middle there. And you also didn't have, I mean, certainly the left had no roots in the labor movement, and the labor movement itself had been in decline for decades. But you didn't have a kind of continuity of experience, really. You certainly, the left hadn't produced a lot of serious, how do I put it? It was so limited to academia in a lot of ways. Outside of that, there wasn't a lot of an intellectual culture on the left, outside of sort of the academics. And there were magazines that were made really important contributions, often held over from an earlier era. Monthly Review from the 50s and the 60s, or a magazine like Dissent, which is, a lot of people read now and is important. But there was nothing like Jacobin at the time.
It was middle brow in a good way. I mean, like in that it wasn't a theoretical journal. And it also wasn't a movement publication. And I think the problem with movement publications is, sometimes you would read The Nation, and I mean, this is something other people said. I wasn't reading The Nation when I was a fucking 5-year-old, but you would read The Nation in like the 90s, people would say. And you would think that we were winning if you only read The Nation.
Well, I read The Nation and I never thought we were winning.
I read like Joe Sports, like some old wise DSA man told me that. And I was like, that's nice. I'll use it one day. And here I am 10 years later and it bombed, but, but anyway, you would read some movement publication. Actually, to be honest, he wasn't talking about The Nation. He was talking about another publication that I think we like better than The Nation, so we won't mention. But you would read certain publications and it would just be, they'd be so looking forward to grapple on to anything that was emerging in day-to-day politics that it was sometimes disorienting, right? It was always easier to publish stuff that says everything's going fine, we're winning, than to publish, realer stuff, right? Sure. And there needed to be a publication that was a step removed from politics, but often the publications that existed were too many steps removed from politics. Like the NLRs of the world and whatnot all played, historical materialism was emerging around that time.
Which both, played by the way, role. They came out of the British left, right? I mean, it was where there was more of an intellectual left, more of a left.
Even the International Socialist Journal, whatever you think of it today, was publishing interesting articles. Then, I mean, maybe still publishing interesting articles. I just haven't read in a while. But I think that's there was room for something that was in the middle that could publish both pieces that grappled more with theory, pieces that grappled at a higher level, that didn't necessarily have to have a conclusion, but was still resolutely and openly socialist, which I think was an interesting middle ground. And obviously now with Jacobin, we find that middle ground, but in a different way, because our online articles are definitely very directly political, but we combine that with print material and with Catalyst, which is appropriate steps removed from politics. But
and by political, you mean engaging in kind of immediate political questions?
Immediate, like what we should do tomorrow, right? As opposed to a framework and perspectives about like, here's how you should think about something. Because if you nail down how to think and analyze and interpret something, you could use that framework to make your own sort of conclusions and also understand the next thing, right? And in a way, we were all trying to discover a socialist tradition from scratch through bits and pieces. Even when you think about the democratic socialist intellectual tradition, it doesn't really exist. A lot of the generation of democratic socialists are post something. People like Irving Howe came out of the Trotskyist movement. Harrington came out of the Catholic worker movement. Nowadays in Europe, a lot of these great democratic socialists have come out of official communist movements. Iglesias came out of the communist youth in Spain. And Die Linke, some of them are post-Stalinist, or came out of orthodox, communist traditions. So we're post something, but there were very few thinkers who I think were articulating a set of politics on the left that was non-Leninist as opposed to anti-Leninist, I guess, if that makes sense, and also willing to see some good in some parts of the social democratic experiment. And I think there was Miliband in the UK, and really and Leo Panich and a few people like that. And Jacobin has been able to piece together all these different strands and connect it with unrelated traditions and try to synthesize from scratch kind of a new socialist tradition. I'm not sure how successful we've been, but I think that's been part of the purpose.
I think pretty successful. I want to come back to both Jacobin's kind of political outlook, insofar as there is a coherent kind of worldview, and also the way it's evolved more recently. I do want to ask, and you're kind of touching on this. I mean, the other part of my experience on the fringes of the far left in the bad old days of isolation was that, there's a way in which maybe at its best, you could get a kind of political education and learn a history a little bit. And a history that you would not get anywhere else in American society, a history of movements and struggles and really inspiring kind of events, radical protests and revolutions and
also a real international perspective. Like you cared about, it wasn't just voyeurism or romanticism, but on the left, you were trained to care about what happened to our comrades. And you could say it unironically in Argentina and in Chile in the 70s and 80s. Like it was, and there was, I think, so when we say that the left is like a noble tradition and has been, it isn't just rhetoric. I mean, there was this, I think, culture that we were inculcated with. That's very healthy in a way, in every sense, and rewarding.
But there's a flip side to that, which is that this degree of powerlessness and marginalization from any kind of practical politics, being able to implement any aspect of your vision or even fight for it in a serious way, meant that you could get trapped in this history. I mean, someone in the chat at the beginning posted a video of a Michael Parenti talk. And I once saw a video of Michael Parenti talking about how he had been in a debate over or had been attacked for a position, something he said about the Kronstadt uprising of Russian sailors in 1918 in Russia. And it was a kind of long running debate between anarchists and different types of socialists. And he's like, well, look, this is a century ago. You can't define your politics just by things that happened a century ago. And, at the end of World War I, when the Tsarist Empire is falling apart and millions of people have just died on the Eastern Front, it's just like a different universe. And so being able to both bring to bear that historical perspective and that broader vision without getting trapped by it, I do think is one of Jacobin's strengths, right? Is something that it contributed to the left.
Yeah, definitely. And also knowing that it actually, some of these debates aren't just entirely useless and academic, but they need to be tied in with a more important project. And I always quote you on this because I like it a lot. But what you said when we had that conversation together, that we need a left that could learn from 1917 Russia and 1971 Sweden. I liked it because it was a nice turn of phrase. And also he said it verbally at an event. So 1771, that's nice. Anyway.
Yeah.
They don't make them like this Jonah Birch anymore. Yes, and please do press the like button and please send us some super chats. We'll put it to good use, or we could buy a beer. We could if you just give us a $5, Jonah's doing this for free, so we could buy him a beer next time when the bar's open in New York.
One day that'll happen again.
And we will also answer nearly any question. But yeah, no, I think that was a major part of what we've had to offer was like the historicization. And when people often ask, I'm a leftist, I want to become a leftist, or at least, besides for engaging in activism and having moral and ethical, commitments that one should have if one's a socialist, what should I read? That's still the most common question. I probably get that emailed to me at least 3-4 times a day, actually. Like, what should I read? Recommendations, that kind of stuff. And often what I tell people is that they should read history, because they're looking to read either Marx right away, or they're looking to just read works of theory, or they're but in fact, if you have a sense of history, then you also have a sense that, well, all history is a history of class struggle, but that means there's always been people resisting exploitation, resisting domination throughout history, and we're part of this tradition. And that's something that I think Jacobin has done well, which is a fealty to a tradition and a sense of one seriousness when dealing with the certain authors and certain moments that we combine with irreverence. Because if we were just entirely irreverent and we didn't care what like the olds or whatever thought, and we didn't care about anything that happened before we were born, or any kind of older debates or lessons from the left, then I think it would have really came across.
Yeah. It's a myopic worldview. I mean, it's one of the weaknesses of the American left still, right? I mean, it's something that's unavoidable a little bit, is that you're getting a new generation that I see a lot of people radicalizing. But of course, people are very rapidly, but we're all still learning about that history and developing our kind of political frameworks, but starting from new, right? And of course you want to help people develop a kind of broader horizons. And now, insofar as you see Jacobin as part of this political tradition, how would you define that tradition? How would you define that? I mean,
well, first of all, I got to respond to a question in the chat, because I must say, this isn't an OnlyFans. This is a YouTube super chat, and also those are Canadian dollars, right? So if you were going to ask a question like that, I want US dollars, all right?
Wait,
none of this Canadian bullshit.
This is someone who asked how.
No,
how
okay. So sorry. Repeat the last part of your question.
What is the tradition that you would say Jacobin is part of? I mean,
I would say it's a democratic socialist tradition, right? And we're kind of inventing as we go along, but it sees the virtues of certain parts of the social democratic tradition, at least what was accomplished, but also sees the limitations of social democracy, and doesn't actually believe that a stable social democratic arrangement can be maintained within capitalism. So it's to the left of the traditional social democratic tradition. Then beyond that, I think that it is a tradition that seeks a rupture with capitalism. So in that sense, is part of the revolutionary socialist tradition, but it is non-Leninist. And I use non-Leninist instead of anti-Leninist, because often what people associate with Leninism is just parties, structures, organizations. They associate even democratic centralism in its most basic meaning, not its perversions, with Leninism. And I think from that standpoint, we've been trying to carve out something we call democratic socialism. But on the broader intellectual sense, I think we are materialists, right? We try to find materialist explanations for things. We use a Marxist framework. We might come from different traditions when it comes to what framework we use. I think a lot of us are inspired by analytic tradition. Some of us, are inspired by a certain variant of it. A lot of us are inspired by Eric Olin Wright, I think, in particular, Miliband,
famous sociologist, a late
famous sociologist. So there's definitely a tradition, but I think it's more. It's a fairly ecumenical tradition, and I would also define that we're pretty stubborn defenders of universalism. And I think that means that to defend universalism resolutely while still understanding the validity of struggles that might come from particular forms of oppression, I think is a important thing. And I think it's being lost in the left today as we're constantly pulled between the poles of the most narrow sort of particularisms, the most narrow form of identitarian politics, but then on the other hand, a overcorrection to that I think risks missing the importance of struggling against all forms of oppression and bringing those struggles against oppression into a class framework, into the workers' movement, into the actual vehicle that can finally resolve these contradictions. Because we really don't want to spend the next 200 years litigating forms of privilege and what forms of oppression are worse. We want to actually get rid of these forms of oppression.
So, let me just ask you to expand a little bit on, and I think there's something worth digging into here about the reference to Ralph Miliband, who I think there's a Jacobin Talks episode with Leo Panitch about him. Is that right? Did I make that up?
Yeah, Leo did one with us. Yeah.
Yeah. And Miliband, this kind of the legendary, post-war British Jewish Marxist figure, on the far left, who, people still read his works on, the end of parliamentary socialism and his works on the nature of the capitalist state, and really important contributions. His children, one of whom in particular, more of a disappointment, but David and Ed Miliband became kind of more not as left wing. Definitely figures inside the British Labour Party. Ed Miliband was the former leader of the party, but he himself was always an unabashed radical, a socialist, someone who was very much against capitalism. He also was writing in a context that's very different than ours, in which in Britain and in much of Western Europe, there were the dominant politics were these kind of the labor, social democratic, reformist socialism. And then in the 60s and the 70s in particular, you have the reemergence of a far left that saw itself as wanting to, a rupture with capitalism, saw itself in opposition to those kind of social democratic politics, but also had a tendency to kind of cement themselves in these kind of toy Bolshevik sects. And he said, neither this nor that, right? We are to the left of social democracy, but we're not going to get trapped in the kind of small world of sect politics. He also was writing at a time when there were still serious labor militancy was a common phenomenon. In Britain in the 70s, you had major strikes, wildcat strikes all over the place. It was a real period of militancy. I'm intrigued in what you're saying that, we're kind of, to the extent we're continuing that tradition, it's in such a different context. It raises all kinds of different questions and issues for us. I could think of a few, but I wonder what you think about that. For example.
Yeah, no, I think we need politics in a context, right? So in other words, like if you're to use a convoluted example, right? Jonah's just piecing. No, I'm just kidding. He might be getting a charger or something. But if you're in or he's turning on a light. If you're in, let's say, Italy in the 1970s, and you see that 1/3 of the population is voting for the Communist Party, and a bunch of people are voting for a socialist party that's obviously we know now is just a piece of shit, or at least its leadership was, but had a radical program, then you could say, okay, a close to majority of proletarians, actually probably majority of the working class, is backing some type of socialism. They say their end goal, at least programmatically, of these parties that's being won over by the working class is socialism. I'm a revolutionary socialist. I believe that these people want the right things, but they're pursuing the wrong route to get these things that I think they want, right? That's an easier context to have revolutionary politics, right? When there's a mass reformist current. And especially when there's that mass reformist current that's connected to an existing working class subject. So today, and similar to that, there was an old William Morris quote that was like, workers think they are a class, whereas they ought to be a society. So they think they're just a class, but they
The
actually
famous
running shit.
19th century British
Exactly.
socialist poet. Yeah.
So they think they're just a class of people, but in fact they should be running society because they make everything work, right? Whereas today you could be on the left and say, well, where is this working class that even thinks it's a class, right? Where is this working class that's even supporting mass reformist politics in its objective class interest? And in what context does it make sense to be a revolutionary when there's not even mass reformist politics? And I think that was the environment that many of us entered. And it's not that we think, let's say today, the Bernie-crat agenda is sufficient, but we think that's a necessary basis to build any sort of radical politics. Like if you don't have the class power to enact Medicare for all and universal childcare, like you probably don't have the class power to bring about worker control of the means of production. So we don't see this as separate things. And I think that's part of the basic premise of Jacobin. But then again, and this is where I like Michael Harrington and actually in a book by Christopher Phelps and Howard Brick, I think Howard Brick. I was about to say Howard Beck, but that's a Nick's later. Yeah. But they use the example of the margin and the mainstream, right? And that's been the classic balancing act of the left in the 20th century. We've either been too content in our marginality, or we've been totally abandoning our principle to try to embrace the mainstream. So what would it be to be a left that, as Michael Harrington put it, kind of can walk the tightrope between speaking to people's day-to-day concerns, but also having a vision of a different sort of world and not capitulating to actually existing capitalism? And I think that's the balance. That's a trick. And even with Jacobin, like I think we are walking that tightrope now. And we now have over 60,000 subscribers to our print quarterly. We're not a mass thing given that we're in a country of 330 million people, but I think we are navigating dilemmas that are good dilemmas to have. Just like in the future, groups like Democratic Socialists of America and our future, hopefully, labor parties and things will rise in the future, or mass movements of different forms, will have to balance with even much stronger pressures along those lines.
I'm wondering how much you think things have changed since 2016. Because to me, after 2 decades on the socialist left, it feels like a new universe, not just with the growth of DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, but there's just such a much wider audience for socialist politics. Many more people are kind of gravitating towards the left, and there's a much deeper, like the politics are more coherent, and they're penetrating deeper than was true, even at the height of the Iraq War, when we were having protests all the time. You never felt like left politics were really making inroads with millions of people, and now you do, or I do at least. And I wonder if you see that shift since 2016.
Yeah, no, there's definitely been a massive shift, and I think people really want to live in a better world and are willing to make sacrifices to live in a better world. And I think that explains a lot of the new activism, including some of the activism like on campuses and other stuff that are a bit silly, to be honest, like in my mind at least. But I think a lot of them are rooted in this impulse. And in America, like in this country, to actually get people to engage in politics, that's really something, right?
Sure.
In America, the fact that there are so many fairly middle class, fairly liberal white Americans that are participating in the Black Lives Matter protests right now, I actually don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's actually a fantastic thing because we know how hard it was, even in 2003, 2004, to organize people to fight against the Iraq War, or to feel some sort of empathy or solidarity with 500,000, Iraqis that your government was about to kill, Yep. And I do feel now that the culture, which is obviously rooted in politics, but the culture is such in America now that if we are to resist a call to war, there's going to be a lot more support. If we are to try to make America more humane by dismantling mass incarceration or fighting for something like Medicare for all, I do think we're in a better position and a better terrain to do that right now. I think it is the case that mainstream liberalism has moved to the left, at least rhetorically. We can complain about it programmatically, but there's no doubt there's been a shift. Obviously, there's the continued hollowing out of civil society and continued class de-alignment of the Democratic Party even more than it was, and was never really a proper workers' party or social democratic party to begin with, but continued de-alignment. And these are broader concerns. I think climate change will be a big boon to the populist right as opposed to us. There's a lot of concerns that I have going forward, but DSA is one of the largest active democratic forces in the United States, just because everything's so hollowed out, not because we have that many members. And we can elect candidates through primaries. We are pretty close to being able to run national campaigns, broader front campaigns. I think DSA should be even more vocal, putting its energy in some of those. So, I think there's a lot to be really optimistic about. At Jacobin, the real balance is going to be, how do you celebrate the emergence of sort of a mass new form of liberalism or new form of elected officials within the Democratic Party, while still holding on to what I think is very important, which is a vision and a practice of independent political action. So in other words, that sounds like just dogma, like we're just saying words disconnected from anything. But if we do think that working class people have distinct interests and need distinct representation, then it's hard to abandon that if you're gonna do socialist politics. So we have to find ways around our particular political system and the particular problems that we face, and make interventions. So I think Seth Ackerman's Blueprint for a New Party is a really good example of starting from the premise that there's something distinct about working class people, and there's something distinct about the type of politics that flow from working class life, but then looking seriously about the barriers to enacting that kind of politics in the US, the structural barriers, and presenting a strategy, agree or disagree with it. And I think that's the kind of thinking I want in Jacobin. Materialist and hard-nosed that neither capitulates to reality nor completely ignores it. And I think we're either doing one or the two on the left often.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I wonder if concretely... Oh,
seems like Oscar accidentally stepped out, so we're gonna wait for him to come back. But
should I tell some jokes or something? Like,
do you have any jokes?
No, none. Absolutely none.
All right, well then you're not going to tell jokes. We could go through. It's actually pretty remarkable how much the site has changed, and it's a big thanks to Ramike on this front.
Yes, there we go. There we go. Yeah. Branko, one of our greatest Marchetich, one of our greatest staff writers, did some sort of interview today, and he sent me 2 gigabytes of files to get transcribed. So I've been trying to upload that, and I realized my connection has been very shitty because that's been going on in the background. So I just took care of it. Wait, hold on. So up until the last one, go back to the last site. See, wait, is that Ramike? That's Ramike's probably. Yeah. I designed the first iterations of the Jacobin sites when it looked really bad. And this is like when it starts to look fucking really good. And that's Ramike's doing. Yes. So much improved. We've come a long way. And a lot of it, even from like the way that we do our print issues. So Jacobin readers, attentive Jacobin readers, might know that since issue 14-15, we've been completely themed. Deciding to go to themed issues and the structure of our print issue, all that was done by Ramike. So he's kind of the co-publisher as well as designer. I'm just more of the song and dance man. But no dancing. Okay. Not enough money in the, not enough money in the super dance.
Either. No singing either.
Yeah.
Let me say, Bhaskar, whatever. There's a way in which people on the left personalize politics in a way that can be ugly and destructive. But I think you deserve a lot of credit that there was a way in which this was your baby, and not a way. This was your baby and your vision originally. And you had the genius for making it happen, and the political instincts to make it relevant and to capture something about the direction of the left, and people and the ability to engage with people, I would say, including people that you don't always agree with. And that's been me at times, in a productive way that I think pushes things forward.
Well, I think we now agree on basically everything, or pretty close to everything. I don't want to ascribe some of my more ridiculous views to you, but on important things we agree. But at the beginning, I think the first time we met was actually a debate in 2013 or something. We were debating different positions. And my position at the time, which I was presenting, was a more traditional Harringtonian kind of realignment position, I think, as far as how we relate to the Democratic Party. You were advocating a more radical, immediate, independent political action and break position. Neither of us have those exact positions today. I think we have an amalgam of the two. But, I think engaging in good faith has been a lot of the things and to me, I mean, the thing that I will give myself credit for is generally knowing what I don't know. At least privately, one needs to know what you don't know, and it's been very rewarding to bring along a lot of particularly sociologists and historians in the Jacobin orbit, and as editors, and same thing for everybody who staff writers and others at Jacobin. We have to know a little bit about everything to make these commissions and to work with people, but we really do defer to this expertise and experience and whatever else. And as far as being ecumenical beyond that, what's the old Lewis line? Who gets the gander, the hunter, or the dog?
I thought it was who gets the bird.
Well, gander sounds much more folksy, right?
Anyway? What's a gander? It doesn't matter. Yes,
the gander is a goose, right? Is gander a goose? Can somebody please?
I thought it was goose in the gander. Yeah, someone in the chat.
Gander. I thought a gander is some sort of goose or something. We should ask the Canadian who's in the chat, trying to fucking give us these Canadian dollars in the super chat. What a gander is. So anyway, it would probably make more sense if we said bird.
Concretely, and I want to ask you where things are headed, but Jacobin, I feel like the Marvel universe, the Jacobin universe, has expanded a lot over the years, and there's Catalyst is the kind of sister journal, which was founded in 2016, 2017?
I think spring 2017 or something. It's only basically 2 years old. No, 3 years old. Yeah, fuck. Yeah.
But this is video from
That's Vivek Chibber on the right and Renee Rojas. Chibber is the editor of Catalyst. Renee's on the editorial board.
No.
Renee's probably talking about maybe his issue on Latin America's Pink Tide, which is, I think, one of the best things Catalyst has published.
It's great. Monster of an article. I know there are other things, including the expansion into YouTube, which, if there's one thing YouTube has been lacking, it's definitely it's Jacobin. It's us, that's an important contribution. But I wonder also if you think concretely, as the political situation has evolved, the political terrain, the kind of task, the role of Jacobin has evolved as well. In other words, let me say this. I think my impression is, since the first Bernie campaign in particular in 2016, there is, as you kind of said, more articles, more material, more of an effort to reach out to a even wider kind of segment of people beyond. Gander is a male goose. Good to know.
There we go. Oh, and look, we got a left social democrat in the chat. You, Jonah, and we got some Swedish currency there.
Wonderful. Keep the money coming.
Dylan asked a question: when is Richard Wolff doing one of these talks? we love Richard Wolff. We actually have been in touch with him about other stuff, so we're going to invite him. Hopefully in October, he'll do a talk. If you have any ideas for what he should talk about, please let me know. I think I was going to ask him about the cooperative movement and what socialists should think about it. But anyway, I'm up for any ideas for a Richard Wolff talk.
Anyway, do you want to say, is there anything concretely you want to say about the kind of strategy, the vision for Jacobin's expansion, and what kind of material it's putting out? What do you think?
I mean, I think the most important thing is that there are only so many people, a finite amount of people we could reach with a 3,000 word printed essay, right? So I think publishing as many articles as we do online is about reaching people on social media. It's about connecting with like immediate interventions in a more immediate way with a lower barrier of entry without really diluting our analysis, right? It's in a smaller bite, but it's not like we are writing utterly condescending or patronizing things, and in many ways, you could say what you want about the Jacobin audience. Obviously, it's evolving over time, but we have over 2 million people on the site every day, so we're reaching a lot of working class people. There's not that many grad students. Actually, there might be that many grad students. I don't know. And we had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar write for us. I mean, and also along other lines, like with YouTube, like Nando and Anna reached it overlaps a lot. We have a horror viewers who are on with Jacobin Talks and the Weekend Show. But the Weekend Show live reaches like some weeks close to 1,000 people. So a lot of people live, and that's a different audience. It's a different like I want people to be able to consume our politics and think about these issues when they're in the car, when they're cooking dinner for their kids and whatever else. And that means doing video and audio and figuring out a way to do it well. And also just bringing in people with different talents. So we have some really talented podcasters involved with Jacobin. Now we obviously have Cale Brooks, who everyone watching this knows and just heard. And he has this talent to produce these videos and the other work he does. And that's actually, and also we have other people who are really good at speaking. I'm trying to think of people in our network, but I don't want to say they're bad at writing, but they're really good at speaking. And a lot of leftists can write. A lot of academics can figure out how to make an argument at length, but some of them have a special talent for taking these arguments and making them digestible and accessible. Vivek Chibber is one of the clearest lecturers on the left, and he's a good writer. But I think that's something where we want to utilize his talent there. It's a shame that Eric Cohen-Wright has obviously passed away, because he was another extremely clear both writer and presenter. And there's lots of other people that we want to harness their talents. And then the last thing I'll say, unless you have any more questions or a way to wrap up, is that I think institutions are extremely important. It's hard. I just turned, I'm 30. I'm 31 now. I turned 31 3 months ago. This last year didn't really count. It didn't feel like anything. But a lot of the Jacobin base is in their 20s and 30s. We're pretty young people in general. So it's strange to think about institutions and institutional continuity. Of course, the sudden passing of our friend Michael Brooks, I think makes everyone contemplate their own mortality and the mortality of people they love. But with us, what we want to do is create a institution that can help train future generations of leftists and create a body of thought that will exist and keep the flame alive for democratic socialism, even if we can't win socialism in our lifetime. Socialism in our time has always been our aspiration, but as long as there's capitalism, as long as there's that contradiction, and I don't even mean this in kind of a crazy malice way, but exploitation and oppression and treating people like shit provokes a resistance, and that resistance is always going to be there as long as there's class society. And there's always going to be the need for our type of politics. Maybe it won't even call itself socialist, but I think it'll embody a lot of its spirit. And we're part of this we're part of this tradition. We'll stick around for the long haul, and we'll stick around because of your help. You know, Jacobin was started with nothing. Even now, like, our subscriptions are pretty cheap, so it's not our just our core subscribers who keep us going. It's people who give $5 here, $10 here that allows us to keep expanding and taking risks, because your average Jacobin piece is not going to be a big. We're not going to get 1 million clicks or a lot of ad revenue from some of the talks that we do, but they're all valuable and important. But Jonah,
yeah. I was going to ask you for some predictions. First on Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals, but then.
So I'm a Knicks fan, as people know by now. That makes me. Oh, there we go. We can guarantee that there are at least some working class people reading Jacobin, I guess, but aren't there 0.2 million capitalists? So maybe it's a coalition of the grad students and the elite. So I will take that question from that last question too. But
here's a real question.
But my actual position is I'm for what a defeatist position in the old language, right? I'm for the common rune of both the Celtics and the Heat. I must say, based on the roster, I got to go with Miami. In a weird way, I have begrudging respect for Pat Riley for just whipping the Knicks and making us feel bad for losing him. And Jimmy Butler, they're a likable team. The Celtics, you guys are Tatum and Jaylen Brown are young. You'll have another shot at it. And I don't want to do the whole Lakers Celtics fucking history. Imagine all the clips they're going to constantly show. The Knicks haven't at least we messed up some of the Lakers run in the 70s, but we're a terrible franchise. I just want a 7 seed. I want a 7 seed and a first round victory in the next 10 years. That's
as a Celtics fan, I gotta say the utter ruin of the Knicks still gives me joy, and I feel bad about it, but it does. Anyway. But just beyond basketball, I think it's good. We should end with this. Where do you see Jacobin in 10 years?
Okay,
also,
that's great.
Who do you think is going to be on the Supreme Court in 10 years? Will there be a Supreme Court? No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
You don't have to answer that. But.
Where do I see Jacobin in 10 years? I think honestly, Jacobin should just. My vision for things is never a big, vast vision. It's just, how do you do things a little bit better with the resources that you have, right? How do you improve by 5, 10%? And that means both quality, how do we get deeper journalism? How do we get the funds to invest in this or that? How do we continue to have a really incredible print edition and whatever else? And also quantity. All right, if this works, how do we do it 20 times as big? How do we reach 20 times as much people? So I want to basically hold the line, maintain a set of politics that, like I said, is normal and approachable, and also resolutely Marxist. And I don't think there has to be a contradiction between the two. But yeah, I just want to do a lot of the same. I want Jacobin to be reaching. I'll give you concrete numbers. I want us to be reaching roughly 12 million people every month online. And I want us to have a stable subscription base of 250,000. That's what I want in 10 years. And I know that's kind of just numbers or targets, but the content and the politics, I trust our contributors and their level of political commitments and what they're up to and their scholarly work too. For those of them are scholars and the activism for many of them are activists. I think the content will figure itself out as long as I don't interfere and turn us into a Knicks blog. But the actual
Wait. Bhaskar,
here we go. My mic was briefly unplugged. There are ways to increase it that are purely technical. If someone gave me $1 million to support Jacobin, I might just go ahead and spend $400,000 on Facebook ads. That's a terrible thing to say. Now no one's going to give us $1 million, but But yeah, quantity is a quality unto itself. I believe Joseph Stalin once said that.
Yeah. Good. Wonderful way to end. Listen, if I had $1 million, buddy, I would not give it to you. But that would be lovely. I'm just kidding. I hope people continue with the donations. And
if I had $1 million, I would buy a stake in like a Serbian League Two basketball team.
This is the kind of conversation that we don't need the audience here.
We don't need alcohol for either. But anyway, let people go. Thanks to Kale. Please, last chance, throw us $5 here or do it at jacobinmag.com/donate. I know a lot of you are already subscribers. If you are subscribers, please also share that subscribe link that's in the description with your friends. And yeah, boomers. We did our reader survey, and we have almost very few readers over the age of 44. It's like 19% of our audience. And those are the people we want to reach. And those are the people that doomed Bernie. So we just because Bernie's like 78 or something, and he can't even win over his people. It makes me believe that even in 40, 50 years, we won't be able to win over this demographic. So yeah, tell your parents to subscribe to Jacobin too, or buy them a subscription.
Thanks for that. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow for the weekend show.
Yep. Later.
Bye-bye. Mm-hmm.